Hey y'all, Coaching the Fight here on Sarah B. Tivet, and we're talking about Jacob's trouble. We're here at what we believe is the beginning of Jacob's trouble, and already people are starting to look for signs of Jacob's trouble. For instance, you have the bombing incident that went on over there in Nashville. I saw that a few minutes ago, and the first thing that I thought is it somehow could be related. However, it's too early to tell, at least for me. I would hope I wouldn't see it, but I believe, if we were to see other events go on like that in the very near future, we'll start to make a connection. And, it is definitely to be a sure sign, but for me, that one's a little too early. You guys can tell me what you think about it down there in the comment section. One thing that, has me really concerned is what's all going on over there in Iran right now. Apparently, we're moving in weapons of war like submarines and stuff into the region. And, that I believe is really concerning because we know that World War III is a huge part of, the events of the apocalypse. From what I understand, from all the scripture that I read, it is actually man who strikes first. He goes in and actually starts a war and probably kills a lot of people. And it is the elements that rises up to destroy man's weapons. It's like that's our only defense, is that we have a earthquake or a meteor shower or some type of event that will come in and actually make the war stop. That's the way I understand it. So when I see, talk and even activity going over there in Iran, my ears kind of perk up. But anyway, we've been looking over in the book of Daniel in chapter 12. And one thing I want to do, because, I'm not really a news reporter or anything like that. I never studied politics or anything like that. So, everything we talk about is, we try to keep it scriptural. So what we want to do today is we want to go in over in the book of Daniel, stepping down through the verses in chapter 12, showing, what it is that we can expect to see in, the beginning here of Jacob's trouble. What signs are we looking for in this time? You guys have no doubt seen this calculation on our channel several times here, showing that the events of Daniel chapter 12, the Daniel chapter 12 prophecy was actually pointing to the year 2020. It was actually pointing to today, no doubt. You can use the scripture on the screen to, verify that by way of scripture yourself if you wanted to. And I know some of you guys may, get a little tired of hearing me talk about this over and over, but you have to remember there's two or maybe three reasons why I'm doing these videos. One is I don't want anybody to be caught off guard. The scripture says that if the watchman fails to blow the horn, then the blood of those who don't hear the warnings will be on their hands. And so, I kind of feel like I have a responsibility to, give you guys a heads up on, these events that are coming. And the other thing, is, that our Father told us to feed his sheep. And, so we have to reach out to those who may not, have even heard about this channel and, try to bring them in, so they can get some of this understanding. Biblical truth is not valuable in today's time, but the closer we get to these end times events, those truths will become more important. People, put more stock value. The stock value on biblical truth it's going to skyrocket here, before long. So what, we're trying to do is, bring as many people in as early as possible, so that, we already have a running head start, if and when the Father, needs us to, send a message out by way of this channel. So bear with us as, we kind of, try to reach out to, new subscribers and, people who haven't really heard about this channel or these biblical truths. Now, before we get off in those verses, I did want to share a dream with you guys. Normally, I don't do that. I don't really share all of my dreams because, a lot of them are personal, and plus, who can interpret them anyway. So I usually keep them to myself. But, being that we are on this day, December the 25th, I do want to share a dream with you guys that I had last night. It was actually a couple of them. In one of them, the first one, I woke up in an apartment building. It seems like an apartment building, and it was strange. I was looking around and I was trying to understand where I was at, and nothing looked familiar to me in this room at all. But as I was looking around, I actually caught on to the fact that I was dreaming. I even thought about the fact that I was dreaming. Oh yeah, I'm dreaming. And I actually continued on in the dream. The dream kept going, even though I recognized that I was in a dream. And then the next thing I noticed is that the room that I was in was, it was really messy and junky. It had stuff all over the floor, clothes, piles of clothes on the floor, trash and stuff on the floor, like old Coke bottles and stuff was all over the floor. And I was standing around looking at this stuff, and I felt like I was supposed to clean it up. And this is probably the fourth dream I've had like this, where I've seen debris and stuff on the floor, and I thought it was my responsibility to clean it up. But I was hesitant once again because I felt like it wasn't my mess. I didn't create the mess, and it wasn't even my house. But I was starting to formulate a plan. Was I going to pile up the clothes, and how was I going to clean up this mess? And as I was doing so, I heard some noise in the other room. I could hear it in one of the other rooms. People were talking back and forth, and that made me a little nervous because I didn't feel like I belonged in that place. I wasn't sure if I belonged there, and I didn't know if I was an intruder but I was afraid those people were going to come out of that back room and was going to be surprised with me being there. And, I didn't like that feeling at all. So I thought about whether I was going to lay back on the floor, cover myself up with clothes and hide, or whether I was going to act like I was sleeping or whatever, or was I just going to stand up, and, when they walked in the room, just be standing there, looking just as surprised as they were or whatever. But as I was contemplating this, I noticed a child on the floor. A little boy of about 10 years old was laying on the floor as if he had just woken up too. And he was talking about dates. He was like as if he had an appointment, and maybe he thought that I knew when his appointment was supposed to be. And I didn't know, and I thought, probably the people in the other room was who he was actually talking about, who knew about the date or the appointment that he had. But then a lady appeared. Right there between him and I, there was a lady. She seemed like a nurse type, had on scrubs or something like that. And she could have been some type of administrator because she started taking his information from him. And I was thinking that it was related to his appointment. But then I noticed that my head was stuck. Like, when I was a little kid, I put my head in some little chair and got it stuck in there. And so I was trying to get my head out, and I asked that nurse-looking lady to help me. And she was like, hold on, let me take care of this or something, she said. And, I was a little anxious, and I asked her again, can you please help me get out of this or something like that? And she said, well, just, if you just lift your head up or lift your neck up or something, it'll come out. And so I did. I kind of raised my neck, and immediately I popped out of whatever it is that I was in. But then immediately I woke up. So that was the first dream. I don't like interpreting my own dreams, but if you understand anything about it, please jump down there and we can, add some more detail to make it make sense. But the second dream was really quick. And that one was I saw myself facing an individual. I was looking right at him, and he appeared to be very drunk. He was seemed to be very intoxicated. And as I was looking at him, somebody kind of off to my right and maybe behind me where I couldn't see was, we were debating, him and this other person that I couldn't see were talking back and forth on whether this individual that we were looking at was a member of the 144,000. I can't remember who was saying what, but one of us was saying yes, and the other one might have been saying no, or maybe something like that, as we was trying to see, if this guy was 144,000. Well, the intoxicated individual, he either didn't know who the 144,000 was, or he didn't recognize himself as one. And he kind of shrugged us off and even shook his head in disagreement that, whether he was 144,000. But, as he turned to walk away with his intoxicated, kind of slur and kind of walk or whatever, he was like, I'm a forerunner. And that was the end of that dream. So I thought those was really interesting, especially when they came at exactly, the first one was exactly 12 midnight last night. So thought I'd share that with you guys. But anyway, hope you don't feel like I've wasted your time, because I know in this video you came over to hear about what it is that we are to expect in this great awakening or in this Jacob's trouble. And the reason why I brought that out is you see over here in Joel in chapter 2, one of the things that we can expect in the end times is an increase in the number of dreams and in the number of visions that we will be having. But like I said, one of the most interesting things about that first dream to me was the fact that the room was messy. Like I said, I've had I would characterize that as a reoccurring dream now, is that my room or wherever, it wasn't my room, but this place that I was in had a lot of debris and trash all over the floor or whatever. I don't know if I shared my last dream with you guys where I was given a Bible class to the church, who surprisingly was accepting that Bible class from my wife and I. They were accepting it, readily, which you wouldn't really expect from the Protestant, from the Catholic Church or whatever, but they was. And in that dream too, there was debris all over the floor. Trash and junk on the floor. But anyway, let's come over here to the book of Daniel and chapter 1. Now, like I said, what I want to do is I want to step down through here, because what we want to do is we want to, see what it is that we can expect in these end times. I apologize if, anybody, kind of thought they were going to fly away during this time. I try not to talk like that, because I don't really know the time of that event. But, I will use the words rapture in my videos. Matter of fact, let me show you why. Looking over here in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, you see that there are several definitions for the word rapture. The third definition you see down there is that final assumption of Christians into heaven, which I know most people, when they see that word, that's what they're thinking about. But, we shouldn't sleep on these other two definitions, because when you look at old dictionaries, before they added that third definition in there, the only word for rapture you saw was, what you see there in definition 1, which is a manifestation of ecstasy or passion, or you see down there in the other two definitions, which was carried away by overwhelming emotion or being exalted to a knowledge of divine things. So, a lot of times when you hear me talking about rapture, I'm not thinking about the new definition of the word, or the modern Christian definition of the word. I'm thinking about, the definitions of the word when I go look at that 100-year-old dictionary, on my shelf. And a lot of what we're going to see over here in Daniel in chapter 12, fits those definitions, at least one or two of those definitions. But let's step down through here. Verse 1 says, "And at that time Michael shall stand up. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. and there shall be a time of trouble, such as was never since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time, thy people shall be delivered, everyone that shall be written in the book. Okay, so again, what we want to show is in this video is what can we expect to see during this event. This event, some people call it the rapture, some people call it the Great Awakening. For all of the people that's going to wake up this morning and say nothing happened this, or did whatever. In this video, we want to talk about, okay, what is it that they actually was expecting to see? What was the material manifestation of what they would see here, or during this time, especially on this day, December the 25th, and even, a few days after or whatever. Well, if you're looking here in verse 1 of chapter 12, you need to see that the first thing that will happen is that this Michael will stand up. Of course, Michael is the lawgiver. So my question is, what in that could we actually expect to see? Now, of course, Michael is an archangel, so he is a spiritual being. Now, if he was to stand up, that great prince was standing for the children of thy people, what is it that we could actually expect to see? Is it possible to say that he didn't stand up? What will we expect to see visually, for this event to have taken place? I don't know that, we would have seen anything, visibly. I think, this Michael figure standing up could have very well happened. I do believe that it did happen, or is ongoing, is about to happen here, imminent, if it hasn't happened already. But, how would I know? I don't think there's really anything to see. And then you see the next part, and says, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. Now, of course, that's talking about Jacob's trouble. But again, what is it that we could expect to see, with this going on? Now, again, I point to the bombing over there in Nashville, or the imminent war over there in Iran, and maybe some of the that guy Andrew that was shot over there in, I think it was Columbus. Some of these could be evidences of the beginning of this trouble, but I don't know if we can say, okay, that's clear evidence. That's definitely clear evidence that this Jacob's trouble would have started. I think, I don't know if there is something we can actually see to point at, especially on December the 25th, and say, hey, there it is. That's the event that we was looking for. That's the beginning of Jacob's trouble. Then the next one says, and at that time thy people shall be delivered, everyone that shall be written in the book. And so you have the deliverance of thy people. Now, this right here, as an aside note, I've been wanting to talk to you guys about this as an aside note. This right here, it reminds me of the prophecy of Abraham. Actually his name was Abram over here in Genesis and chapter 15 and verse 13. It says, and he said unto Abram, know for a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in the land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. This is that 400-year prophecy that we hear about. And don't be confused. I know the book of Acts kind of confuses it a little bit. I think Luke might have got that one wrong, because the children of Israel were not in Egypt for 400 years. They was only in Egypt for about 100 and some years, if you actually do the math on that. If you start from where you're at now, or this verse here that you're looking at, when Abram got what they call the Abrahamic covenant, that covenant that says that they wouldn't circumcise. This is, if you start counting from this date until they exited Egypt, you would actually end up with about 430 years total from this covenant right here until you get to the Mosaic covenant was about 400 some years. It may have been exactly 430 years. I had to look at that. But the thing about it, it wasn't 400 years, even if you don't go do the math on that, because, at this time, another thing that he got by way of this conversation that he had with the Most High, was the promise of his son Isaac. Isaac wasn't even born yet. Jacob wasn't even born yet, and 12 sons wasn't even born yet. And then, even after, those guys had grown up, you still have the whole time in Egypt, and it doesn't add up to 400 years. This 400 years was the prophecy that I believe that we're in now. And let me go over there and show you something really interesting. Let me show you something I found on that I heard that went on back there in 1619. You remember everybody was talking about the end of that 400 years for the American slave ended in 2019 because it started in 1619. Here, check this out. You see over here that they still had indentured servants even in 1620, but you see where it's talking about this contract, this so-called contract that they put on these black indentured servants, was when they actually, first started to become slaves at that point. So, but anyway, getting back on topic, that was completely off topic because, what we're talking about over here is Daniel in chapter 12, and what events can we expect to see with this prophecy that was given to Daniel and how it ended on December the 25th of the year 2020. I believe it wasn't pointing to an end. I believe it was talking to a beginning. Those are those verses down there. If you haven't caught wind of them yet, you're looking at verses 11 and verse 12 down there. But anyway, let's come back up. We might get to those here. Let's look at verse 2. It says, "And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt." Okay, so now what does this look like? Many that sleep in the dust of the earth. Now, is this talking about a spiritual being, or is this actually talking about real people, like what we saw over there in the book of Ezekiel, when it was talking about those dry bones coming back together? I don't fully expect to see dead people get up out of the grave, so what is this going to look like? I believe there's actually, nothing really that we're going to see here by way of chapter 2. There's nothing we can point to unless, these dead bodies start walking around and sure then, but I don't think that's really going to happen. And it says, when they rise awake, is some to everlasting life and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Even if we're talking about a spiritual people, or even if it's talking about us personally, talking about our spirit man being awakened, which I think is really what it's talking about, how we're spiritually dead, and how the Messiah told us to raise the dead. He wasn't talking about going in and raising dead bodies. That's why you're not going to find anybody at the funeral home, or at the funeral itself trying to bring that person back to life. Even if they tried, I believe they run them out of there. But when the Messiah over here in Matthew and chapter 10, you see there in verse 8 where he says, "Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils, freely ye have received, freely ye give." I've seen, those other things. I've seen people get sick. I haven't really seen a leper or anything, but I see how they were healed, even back there in the Old Testament. And I've seen devils be cast out. At least I believe I have, but I've never seen a dead body rise, nor would I ever expect to see one here. Matter of fact, that's what we are told in the end times, is that's the way we will know the Antichrist from the Messiah. He will have all of the powers of the Messiah. They're talking about this lawless one, with the exception that he will not be able to raise the dead. And so that lets us know that none of us are going to be able to raise the dead, because this lawless one, he will be able to do all kinds of miracles, even all of the other miracles that the Messiah did, with this one exception. So when it's talking about raising the dead, I believe it's talking about a spiritual people, because we see that happening all the time. Spiritual people, the spiritually dead are being risen, and I believe that's what Daniel was talking about. So, but my point is that even in verse 2, there's nothing to see. We're going through verse 1 and verse 2, and there's nothing, no material manifestation that we can actually see with our eyes. But let's look at verse 3. It says, "And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever." So, what is it that we will be able to see with our eyes to take place in this event? The wise to shine. Are they going to be walking around glowing like Moses did, after he came out of the tent talking to the Father? I don't really think so. I think what it's talking about, I think it's talking about a different kind of shining here that we will not be able to see with our eyes. It says they're going to shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever. Maybe we'll see, this in the future. We very well could see this. I believe we will start to see hints of this. Because like what we see right there in verse 4, where it says, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. So I believe you'll start to see an increase in the Father's people as far as knowledge is concerned, whereas the children of Belial, those who the truth is not that important, they may be these ones that's talking about running to and fro, scrambling, and so you'll see some evidence. I believe you'll start to see some evidence of this as these people start to I don't want to say nothing too bad, but actually start to talk a little crazy or whatever, and some of the things that that they're teaching. Some may start talking about aliens, or some may start talking about this or that, Project Blue Beam. I don't know. My point here is that there's not anything visible to see. There's nothing really visible to see here, and even in this first verses here. Let me go ahead and read verse 4. It says, "But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." So now, one interesting point that you really should understand about this verse right here is how it says, "Seal the book even to the end." Even so, this is one time that Daniel is being told, indirectly this time, that his information will not pertain to what we'll see inside of the tribulation. He down here in these verses, he's telling us the beginning of the tribulation in verses 11 and 12. And we'll get down to verse 7, where he's telling us the end of the tribulation. We'll get to that in a second. But here in verse 4, he's being told that he's not given any information between these two events. He's given the beginning, he's given the end, but he's given nothing in between here. But notice we've gone through the meatiest part of this chapter here. I'll go ahead and read verse 5. It says, "Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood other two, the one on this side of the bank of the river, and the other on that side of the bank of the river." So he's kind of making a transition here, where he's been given this information, so far, and then he's kind of making this transition. But everything, we've seen so far tells us of nothing that we would see here at the beginning of this Jacob's trouble, at the beginning of this great tribulation. Sure, things, will start to ramp up here, pretty quickly. But, when you look down in the comment section of these videos, a lot of people are expecting to see something today. People want to see stuff today. They don't want to see it. They don't want to think about how, we could be at the beginning, and, we'll start to see things trickle in here, trickle in there. No, they want to see clothes laying on the floor today, with the body's gone, or whatever. But something the Father brought out to me as I was listening to the scripture this morning. This would be really interesting in this class, coming out of the Third Testament of the Bible, over here in chapter 27. Look for a link in our videos to this Third Testament. we offer you a link because there's several books and movies and albums and artists and stuff out there called the Third Testament, but there's only really one Third Testament of the Bible. And so that's why I offer you guys a link to this book. If you go out and try to find it on your own, unless you go to that website called jesus-comes.com, you're probably going to find some other book that ain't going to be right. And then, it's going to hurt your feelings because you're like, this don't seem right. Well, it ain't right. There's only one Third Testament of the Bible. And, like I said, I'll give you a link to it. If it ain't in this video, check, 90% of the other videos we've put out in the last 3 years, and we'll have a link to it in that description. But anyway, let's look over here in verse 1 of chapter 27. He says, "How ignorant of the spiritual teachings I find this humanity, and it is because it has been taught that my law and my doctrine are only a morality that will be for use as an aid and not as the path that will guide its spirit toward the perfect mansion." Okay, now look at that closely because it's telling us why there. We haven't gotten to what's about to happen, but it's telling us beforehand that the cause of this is because that we're treating his law and his doctrine as a guide for morality. Like the other day, not too long ago, I walked up to one of the local pastors there, and I asked him if he had read the Bible, which I've done. There's about 7 pastors that live within rock throwing distance of my house. I can walk to about 7 different pastors' houses from where I'm at here. Well, about 4 of them are pastors and 3 of them are other kind of ministers. And I've asked each one of them, have you ever read the entire Bible? Every one of them said no. Most of them, said that, that they've only read only certain parts of the scripture. And that's why I was doing it. That was the purpose, But anyway, one of them, I said, do you think that the Bible is true, is real? This is a pastor of a church, and I asked him if he thought it was real and true, and he told me that he thought it was a guide, just like it's saying here. It had good ideas in it, good stuff for people to follow, but it wasn't really, it wasn't. I can't think of a better word. It wasn't God's word. It wasn't like God said it. It was just a book of good ideas. It's basically what he told me. And so, if the pastors believe that, then what do you think they're teaching? They're teaching the rest of us that. And so that is the cause right there. What does it say? Only a morality that will be of use as an aid. And that's what he told me, and not as the path that will guide his spirit toward the perfect mansion. But look down here. So that's the cause. Look down here. Verse 2 says, "The different religions have come sowing a false fear towards spiritual knowledge within the hearts of man, which has caused them to flee from my revelations and to be submerged in confusion of their ignorance, arguing that the spiritual life is a profound mystery." These people will even go on to try to use derogatory terms and say this new age, this. Anytime you're talking about spirituality and spiritual stuff, they'll try to say it is new age, this, or, it's voodoo, that. They don't really believe in anything spiritual, and it's not their fault. Like it says here, the different religions have done this. It's the religious leaders who has done this, just like back in the day. If you remember the argument between the Sadducees and the Pharisees, well, that's what they were arguing about. The Pharisees believed that they believed in the spirit, but the Sadducees didn't believe in the spirit. They didn't believe in angels. They didn't believe in afterlife. They didn't believe in anything supernatural as far as the spirit world was concerned. The Sadducees said that stuff doesn't exist, and that was their big argument. And so you have modern day Sadducees even today who are teaching that there's nothing spiritual to be seen. But hold on for a second. That actually was a little bit serendipitous because I didn't plan on talking about chapter 27. I planned on talking about chapter 37, and I apologize. I can't really edit that out so easily, but so I'm just going to have to leave it in there. But the verse I really wanted to jump you guys over to was out of chapter 37, which is called the correct understanding of biblical text. Correct understanding of biblical text. And in this section called the interpretation of the word and promises of the Bible. Again, this is the third testament of the Bible, but I wanted to show you just right here in verse 1. It says, men have dedicated themselves to scrutinize the ancient testaments, torturing their minds in the study and interpretation of prophecies and promises. So this is talking about the Bible scholars and those who go back and, try to study, like I said, the ancient testaments. So it'll be the Old Testament and the New Testament. You see right here in verse 1, it goes on to say, those among them who have come closer to the truth are the ones who have found the spiritual meanings of my teachings, because those who still persist in a material interpretation and do not know or do not wish to find the spiritual meanings of my manifestations will have to suffer confusion and disappointments. So this is what's going on. This is why so many people struggle with God, is because they're focusing on the material. It's like Revelation. If you try to concentrate on just the material stuff, it's going to mess you up a little bit. It says, just as the Jewish people suffered upon the arrival of the Messiah, whom they had imagined and awaited in a manner unlike the truth which was manifested to them. So, and this is what we have a lot going on over here. This is why, so many people will have detracting statements, on our videos, especially these ones dealing with this Daniel chapter 12 prophecy, is, they're concentrating on the material instead of the spiritual meanings behind this stuff. But anyway, let's go on. Verse 6 over here in Daniel chapter 12 says, and one said to the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? Okay, now I'm trying to hit every verse in here, but here it is. He's talking about the end here. So, and I apologize for all the hammering. This is a regular old work day here at the Hillbilly Homestead, and as soon as I finish this video, I'm gonna get up there and start hammering with those guys. But anyway, we gotta have our priorities straight, so we gotta get this video out. Anyway, so like I said, he's going to tell him the beginning here. So watch this prophecy right here in Daniel chapter 12, verse 7. It says, and I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the rivers, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and swear by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and half a time, and when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. It's talking about the end of the tribulation there. It's actually talking about the fall of Babylon there. See where it says, accomplished to scatter the power of the people. All these things shall be finished. Now, there's a lot of confusion around the prophecies of Daniel, because we want to equate everything Daniel said to the tribulation. So when we're looking over there and we see that, there is an antichrist that was supposed to stand up, we look at that. Of course, we can make the connection between that, what Daniel was talking about, to Antiochus Epiphanes, and then we want to assume that all of that stuff was going to happen again in the tribulation. But like we saw up there, and we're going to see here again, that Daniel got no information in the tribulation. None of Daniel's prophecies apply between the beginning of the tribulation and the end of the tribulation. But anyway, let me show you how that prophecy is actually solved. What he's talking about is Constantine, who was basically another Antiochus Epiphanes. This Constantine figure did exactly the same thing that Antiochus Epiphanes did. He just did it for a longer period of time, starting a number of years later. When you look over here at this website called softschools.com, you can see that on October the 28th of the year 312 was the time in which Constantine came in and actually claimed that God had talked to him and told him that he was the head of the Catholic Church, or the head of the church, which went on to be what we know as the Catholic Church. That happened in 312. Well, let me show you something right quick. Well, if we come over here to Daniel in chapter 9, we see that a time is 490 years. And then, so if we come over and we look and we say, okay, 312, matter of fact, yeah, if we could say 312, and then we're going to add 490 years times 3.5, you end up in the year 2027. And so that what Daniel is telling us is the end of the tribulation over there in chapter 12. He's telling us that the end, let me jump back over there and show you. Verse 7, you see right there at the bottom in verse 7, he says, and when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, then these things shall be finished. And that's what Constantine did when he went in and, like I said, he claimed that God put him in charge of the church. And they believed him primarily because he made it against the law to actually kill those disciples at that time. So, they put faith in him. They wanted to believe him, especially when, they didn't have to worry about getting their heads cut off anymore. But, if you remember the story, he went on to hijack the Holy Scripture that we know today. He tried to squash it all together and had all of the Catholic people down there speaking in Latin and what's the other language? I can't remember the other language, but they wasn't speaking in a language that the common person could understand. They were speaking in Latin, which was even then a dead language. But when you went to church, and so all you would hear was them speaking in Latin, and you never had a Bible of your own. You never did know what they were talking about. And then when the priests, who they appointed, Catholic era priests, who, when they came and started telling the people, okay, well, what did the Bible actually say? Well, the Bible says for y'all supposed to give us money. If y'all want y'all dead relatives to, be able to go to heaven, y'all got to pay us, and you got to pay us pretty well, was the message that they taught. That's how they actually built the Vatican. That's how they got all of their wealth, is by tricking the people in this way. And if you continue on in the story, you remember that those people who tried to translate the New Testament of the Bible were killed and murdered. So this was the Catholic Church. It was started by this Constantine figure. But my point is that they never wanted you to understand the Scripture at all. Anybody who, was found with the Torah in their house or read the commandments, they killed them. They murdered them, even out there in the street, burned them at the cross for reading the Bible. And so that's what it means right there when he says they scattered the power of the holy people. But he's telling them right there in 2027, all of those events will end. It will be over in 2027. That's where the time and half a time prophecy comes in. And again, people get confused because they think, okay, his time and half a time prophecy somehow is related to what we see over there in the book of Revelation. It is not. It has nothing to do with the Revelation, because Daniel's books were closed and he didn't get any prophecies out of that. We'll see that here in a verse or two. Verse 8 says, and I heard, but I understood not. I, O Lord, what shall be the end of these things? So here Daniel's questioning the man clothed in linen. Verse 9 says, and he said, Go thou, for the words are closed up and sealed to the time of the end. So he's telling you, you don't have any, we're not giving you anything inside the apocalypse to write down. Let me show you an illustration of what I mean. Now, this is one of Clarence Larkin's charts. We can get these over on Google. I just simply did a search for Clarence Larkin's Daniel Revelations compared or something like that. And you'll see this chart here by Clarence Larkin. It is a comparison between the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel. He wrote this book dispensational truth about 100 years ago. You see there the portions of the book of Daniel, right there where, he's talking about the four beasts and all of those individuals. And then up here, you see the book of Revelation, where, you're seeing over here the church in that period right there. That's all in the book of Revelation. Well, if you come over, you see right here how you have the events of the apocalypse. You have the trumpets, the vials. They're a little bit out of order, but like I said, he wrote this book over 100 years ago, and knowledge has increased since then. So we know better than what he understood back then. But my point is when you jump down to what it says about the book of Daniel, see, there's Daniel right there. It's talking about this Nebuchadnezzar figure, but notice how right there's nothing. He's told about the end. There's the end event when that rock comes to crush the toes. So Daniel is told about the end. And it even tells you right there, Clarence Larkin understood that, and that's what it's saying. If you could actually read it, it's saying that Daniel didn't get any information inside of the apocalypse. And so people now are trying to force fit these dates in here. They're trying to force fit the time, and half a time. They're trying to force fit the 1,335 days and the 1,290 days. They're trying to make it fit inside the apocalypse, and it doesn't belong there. It doesn't belong there at all. And we'll see the verses we'll see here in a minute points you right there at the beginning. You see right there where Daniel's prophecies end or stops, or there's a pause. If you scroll up, that pause is right at the beginning of the tribulation. And when does he start getting stuff again? Right at the end of the tribulation. Right in the middle, Daniel got nothing. Right there, it's telling you that Daniel didn't get anything. And it says, it's pointing to Daniel chapter 12 and verse 4. But when we come back over here, we see that was also talked about in, where were we at? Verse 9 says his books were closed up. Verse 4 says his books were shut up. They shut up the words and seal the book. In verse 9, he's again being told that, he didn't get anything for the apocalypse. That's important to understand. So you're confused, waiting for an antichrist figure to stand in the temple. That's why people are thinking that it's going to be a third temple built out of brick and mortar. No, the third temple is a spiritual temple. There's not going to be an antichrist figure in it. That was Antiochus Epiphanes. But anyway, let's go on. Verse 10 says, many shall be purified and made white and tried. The wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. Now, again, this video is all about, what is it that we can expect to see this tribulation? What is it that we're going to be able to point to and say this is going on? Well, I don't necessarily believe you're going to be able to see much on it on December the 25th. You very well could. But, this is talking about, it says, many shall be purified. This purification process is going to last from 2017. We're going to see here through, we have to jump over for Revelations to get 2017. But we'll see that this purification process is going to last all the way until the end. So when you're looking for something you can see with your eyes, are you going to be able to see this purification process? I don't think so. You see right there, and it says, and they'll be tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand. So maybe there's some things we can see as far as wickedness increase. I'm sure we'll start to see this over time, a step increase in the level of wickedness in the world. But, this is all going to take time to actually play out. And then it says, but the wise shall understand. There's nothing really that we can actually put our eyes on in all that we've seen in this book of this chapter 12 of the book of Daniel that we can point to and say, hey, there is the Great Awakening, or hey, there is the apocalypse, or there is the beginning of Jacob's trouble. We see that it's really all spiritual stuff. Matter of fact, let me jump you back over here to the Third Testament, chapter 37, Verse 15 says, "Man has never lacked my revelations of spiritual enlightenment, but he has been afraid to analyze them." Okay, talking about the spiritual enlightenment. For some reason, humankind doesn't want much to do with the spiritual side of our Father. And that's why people, they like worshiping him in forms of figurines and pictures and statues and stuff like that. And the spirit communication is, shunned even. It goes on to say, "And I ask you, what can you know about the truth of the eternal if you stubbornly continue to flee the spiritual?" So, while, people are down there mocking and, like I say, giving detracting statements, these are the same people who, what words did it use there? Stubbornly continue to flee the spiritual. They want nothing to do with the spiritual side, because the spiritual individuals, they already feel like they've been awakened years ago. A lot of people in the comment section of the videos will talk about, their awakening in 2017 or 2014 or even before that. They already feel that spirit to spirit connection between our Father and themselves. So they already recognize themselves. Whereas the people who are caught up in materialism, only thing they're waiting for is, to be sucked off the planet somewhere into the spirit world before they'll believe anything. That day is coming. May not be what they're expecting, but just waiting on the trumpets to blow. And when we get that last trump, they'll get their wish. But anyway, verse 16 says, "Look at the material interpretations you have given my revelations of the first and second eras, though they speak only of the divine and the spiritual." So this is talking about the Old Testament, and it's talking about the New Testament, and how we have given them material manifestations, even going back to Moses' time, even going back to Adam and Eve, the story of Adam and Eve was really, even with the serpent, was a spiritual story. That story should have been understood spiritually, how you had this serpent to come in and to trick Eve. But we took that materialistically, and then you have people wondering, okay, well, how was snakes talking, and stuff like that. When you think about it spiritually, it all makes sense. But when you think about it from a material standpoint, it have you scratching your head, and so. It says, "Do you see how you confuse the material nature with the spiritual, and with what lack of respect you convert the profound to the superficial, and the elevated into what is low?" So when we're trying to see our Father materialistically, that's what we're doing, especially when we do something like make his image, like we're going to draw a picture of him, and then we're going to worship that picture as if it's somehow him. It's not, but he's saying we bring in the spiritual to that which is low. He says, "Why have you done that? Because wishing to participate in the work of God, you seek to adapt my doctrine to your material lives." Okay, so this is the problem. We want to be like God so much that we're turning his doctrine into our stuff. We're making, we'll take the picture of the Messiah, draw a picture of the Messiah and put it on the wall and say that's Jesus. No, it ain't him at all. It never was him, and it will never be him. That's a picture of the Pope's son on your wall. And even if somebody were able to take a picture of that living body that was walking around, that still ain't the Messiah. The Messiah is a spiritual being. It says, "To the human you seek to adopt my doctrine to your material lives, to the human conveniences which most interest you." And that's what we're doing. We're trying to make it convenient. That's why we adopting it to the material. Now, this should be really easy to understand, especially if we jump over to the book of John in chapter 4, verse 23 says, "But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him." So he is a spiritual being, and he prefers that we worship him in the spirit. And if we continue to try to do everything materialistically, then we're going to mess ourselves up. And, this is clear, from the book of Revelation. Let me come over and show you something over here in Revelation in chapter 12. If you remember all of the hype that was around September the 23rd, 2017, talking about the Revelations 12 sign in the sky, when, everybody, even back then, was waiting for a material manifestation of something to be happened there. They were looking at verse 5, which says, "And she brought forth a man child who was to rule all nations with the rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne." So everybody's looking at this Revelation 12 sign in the sky that appeared in 2017, and they're looking, that's, you see that in verse 1 and verse 2, and then they're looking at verse 5, and because they're applying, because they're looking for a material manifestation of that event, all they got was confusion out of the deal. This actually happened, guys, in 2017, but it was just like Revelations 12 is just like Daniel in 12. There's nothing you can see, nothing you can point your eyes to, nothing you're going to be able to point out. Even right there in verse 6, where it's talking about the woman was fled into the wilderness. Well, there was many people to go out into the wilderness, myself included. But did you see it? Did anybody actually see it? I believe I lived it. And it's only here years later that I'm looking back at it and I'm going, hey, that's what happened to me. That right there was in verse 14, and that right there was in verse 17, where these people were flown just like the people in Egypt were taken out of Egypt by way of eagle's wings and flown into the wilderness where they learned to live within the covenant. Well, that's actually what happened to me in 2017, starting with this Revelation 12 sign in the sky, no doubt. I was actually flown into this wilderness, where we'll see this time, and half a time. Now, of course, this is different. This time, and half a time that we saw is different than what we saw over there in the book of Daniel. But anyway, I understand there's a lot of speculation and conjecture in that. But my point about Revelation in chapter 17, is something that happened in the past. We've had, 3 years to analyze it. And, even still, we can't find any material manifestations that happened in 2017. But when you look at it from a spiritual standpoint, you can see it really clearly. Well, that's the same thing with Daniel in chapter 12. When you look at it from a spiritual standpoint, you'll start to see all of these events starting to take place. Even right there, what you say in chapter 10. But anyway, we're looking down here in verse 11. Now, if you've been around our channel, you've probably seen this verse probably a half a dozen times, as we use this to understand that the beginning of the apocalypse, or the beginning of the tribulation, I should say, the apocalypse and the tribulation are different. If you haven't ever looked up the definitions of the word, the definition of tribulation is the people are in trouble. The events are affecting the people. That's what you see, with all of these earthquakes and floods and fires and riots and pandemics. And I can go on and on. Things that are going on, volcanoes, are affecting people all over the world. A lot of people were made homeless in the year 2020. And if you don't see that the tribulation is ongoing, it may be because, you're only thinking about your personal self. Talk about a tribulation to those people who got, who are made homeless or lost loved ones during that time. And they'll let you know that we are actually in the tribulation. But the tribulation affects man. The apocalypse affects the earth. So that is yet to come. That's when we'll start to see those trumpets blow over there and the vials to take place. That is what I refer to as the apocalypse. I know there's multiple definitions of that word, but anyway. You're looking over here at Daniel chapter 12, verse 11. It says, "And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days." Now, I've done this several times, and I'll show you guys a chart here in a second. But this takes us up to when the abomination of desolation, that's talking about the Dome of the Rock. And in verse 12 is actually what we're talking about here, because it's talking about a blessing. It says, "Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,305 and 30 days." So this is where we get the 2020 from, and I'll show you that chart again, that writing again that helps explain this. But just to finish out every verse, it says, "But go thou way till the end be, for thou shalt rest and stand in the lot of thy people, in the lot at the end of the days." So this is right here is actually pointing to Daniel's reincarnation, no doubt. But anyway, let me jump over here and show you this right quick. All three of those verses, 11 and 12 at least, you can use those to come up with 2020. And like I said, I've done this in so many videos. I'll just leave you with this chart here that helps you to help guide you through your own Bible to do so. That's the best thing about having scripture to back up what you say, is everybody has a Bible in their house and you can look it up for yourself, starting over there in Ezekiel chapter 24 and verse 1. But like I said, go ahead and look at those and you see. I really just wanted to address, the people asking questions like, what is it that we can expect to see to happen, on December the 21st, 25th and going forward. And the thing is, is not really nothing, it's all spiritual. It's all spiritual stuff. It's a spiritual. That's why some people call it the spiritual awakening, because there's nothing material you're going to be able to put your eyes on. At least I don't believe so. I mean, you can make certain connections, but and of course, it could be something here coming up. I don't know, but everything we've looked at, I believe, so far points to a spiritual manifestation and not a material manifestation. So, with that, I'm going to say shalom.